What is going on, guys? Today I bring you round 2 of the closed tournament of Marques, and this was a very important round for me psychologically because I don't know if you guys already noticed, but I'm playing against João Gonçalves, which was my opponent in game 63, which was that game that I ended up losing because I couldn't accept a draw, and it was very hard for me mentally because I not only lost but also my team didn't win because of me. So, you know, I wanted to get revenge and to really, win and show that what I am capable of. But yeah, let's see. Funny enough, I actually got the black pieces again, so it's really just a rematch. And let's see how the game went. So my opponent started with e4 again, and instead of the Scandinavian, I decided to play something completely opposite. And to everyone's surprise, I actually played the Sicilian defense. Yeah, I'm very happy right now to say that I played the Sicilian defense because this has always been an opening that I've respected a lot. But I just couldn't get around playing it. I thought that I wouldn't be good enough to play it because it's very dynamic, and you need to be good at tactics, and that was never my specialty. But I decided to risk it and start playing the Sicilian more often, even though the few times I played it, I don't really have good memories of it. But let's see how this game went. So my opponent went knight c3. He went for the closed Sicilian. Of course, I prepared mostly the open Sicilian, but I was also prepared for pretty much everything. And here, after knight c3, I played d6, and my opponent went f4. So the Grand Prix attack, which actually I'm very familiar with because I've played it quite a few times in online chess, and also I tried going into similar ideas against the Sicilian when I played white. But yeah, here I played g6, going for this sort of dragon setup, which I like against the Grand Prix. My opponent went bishop c4, I went bishop g7, knight f3, knight c6, d3, and here e6. So pretty much everything is standard. I don't know if we are following theory or not, because even though I know some ideas, I don't really know this by heart, because it's not the main thing that you should be preparing against Sicilian in general. But yeah, I was very happy with this opening so far. I thought that I had my ideas, my plans, and I was very comfortable here. So yeah, e6 to kind of stop this bishop from having ideas to sacrifice on f7. And after castles, knight g on e7. And my opponent went for the pretty typical Grand Prix attack, which is queen e1. And this queen e1 move is it's a very important idea to know when you're playing against the Grand Prix attack, or when you're playing it, because the idea for white is to bring the queen to h4, then push f5, even like sacrificing a pawn to get the bishop out. The knight comes here, and there's a lot of attacking possibilities. So it's a very aggressive opening, and black really needs to be careful and know what they are doing. But here I castled without fear. There's some games that I've seen in the past where black tries to delay castling and actually tries to castle queenside. But I was like, okay, castling kingside is perfectly fine, and I'm gonna keep it pretty much simple and straightforward. I don't want to be risking too much. So yeah, castles, and here my opponent went straight for queen h4. And here we had pretty much a lot of time on the clock, both of us. And here I did my first big think, because I had some decision to make. I can definitely play d5, which was the move that I ended up playing, but I was considering other moves like for example, a6, maybe knight a5. But you know, the saying goes, whenever you can play d5 in a Sicilian, you should. And so yeah, I ended up playing d5. But a6 was also one of the engine's top moves. It was a6 and d5. But here, I don't know, I just didn't like the fact that after a4 my opponent could tuck his bishop on a2 and keep the bishop pair. So I just decided to just go d5 here. And yeah, my opponent played bishop b3, which is actually the best move by far. The other moves are all inferior. Let's say during the game, after I played d5, my opponent thought for a while, but I was also trying to figure out what I would do on bishop b5 here. Yeah, I didn't really know if I would play a6 or if I would move this knight or the queen. But here, actually, knight d4 apparently is very strong, and I guess the idea after takes is that I can take with the bishop on d4, and now after king h1, like a6, it's not pleasant at all for white. Actually, here it's just, you know, losing a piece straight up. So yeah, but my opponent played the correct move, bishop e3, and now the bishop is not getting trapped, but I actually get the opportunity to play knight a5, which, you know, it's a move with a clear purpose. I'm not trying to be sneaky or whatever. I just want to capture the bishop pair, and you know, argue that if I take this bishop, his attacking chances will be lower, which is definitely a good argument that you can make here. My opponent thought for a while and ended up making his first mistake in the game. My opponent played a4, which I actually was very surprised but happy to see. Of course, the idea, I think, of a4 is to force me to take the bishop on b3. Otherwise, he will tuck his bishop on a2. But honestly, I was gonna take the bishop anyway, and I did take the bishop immediately. But here, you know, I was actually kind of looking at, before I played knight a5, I was looking at f5, which I feel like it's a way stronger move and way more challenging. And as I said before, the idea of this opening is really just open lines against black's king. And here I was trying to you know, calculate, what do I do first? Do I take this pawn first with g takes f5? Very important to take with the g pawn, because, for example, if white tries to play bishop h6 here to, you know, put pressure on my position, and is threatening queen g5, just winning on the spot. Now here I can actually, you know, first I can even play something like knight g6 probably. And yeah, if we end up trading here, I actually am happy with my position, because, I mean, white no longer has the attack. But yeah, this is like very complicated, and there's a lot of stuff going on. But I was looking forward to meet f5 with these sort of moves, g takes f5, and then put the knight on g6, you know, threaten to trade queens, etc. Also, for example, bishop g5 here would be met with f6. And yeah, this is not so pleasant for white. Let's say bishop h6 again, knight g6, and, you know, I feel like I'm getting an edge here for sure, and white just sacrificed the pawn for not much, right? But okay, this didn't happen. My opponent played a4, I took the bishop on b3, and after c takes on b3, I just played knight c6, which I feel like is a very natural and strong move. The idea is to, you know, offer a queen trade, which my opponent of course shouldn't take. Like, the computer is a computer and says that the best move for white is to take on d8, but I mean, I think this would be just admitting that the opening went horribly wrong. I mean, there's no more chance for mating, and yeah, I mean, black has the bishop pair, better structure, and yeah, I don't think white can do much here. It will just suffer. So my opponent, I think, correctly played the more human move, queen g3, keeping the queens on the board and also keep the attack going. Here I played knight b4 without spending too much time. I think the knight is very well placed on b4, also putting pressure on d3. And at this point in the game, I had actually a quite convincing time advantage here compared to my opponent, just like in our first match. And I was happy. I knew that I had to be better. And I knew that I still had a lot to prove, because even though I'm better, it doesn't mean anything. But here my opponent defends the pawn with rook d1, and yeah, here I thought for a long while, because okay, I'm better, I know that, but how do I continue? Because how do I keep putting pressure on my opponent's position? This bishop on c8 is still a bad piece because it's just blocked by the pawns. And for that reason, I decided to play b6. My opponent played e5, which kind of surprised me, but it is actually the best move in the position here. And yeah, what I wasn't expecting e5, because I thought, okay, my opponent is playing e5, so that means that he will pretty much never play f5, because he just put a pawn on e5 and he no longer can break through, because the f5 square is just forever protected. So I thought, I was very happy, and I thought that e5 was actually not a good move. Also, this bishop on c1 is just looking a bit ridiculous without many squares to go. It can only go to d2. So I actually ended up realizing that e5 is strong, in the sense that now I feel like he's threatening to push d4 in the next move. Let's say I play bishop a6, which actually the engine says that it's the best move. I didn't really like this because of d4, and now yeah, it just blocks my bishops, and I thought that I was kind of forced to take here, and after knight takes, I just thought that my position was not good anymore. And yeah, this is definitely not good. But here I actually had a way better move that I didn't even consider, which was knight c2, attacking the rook on a1 and also attacking the pawn on d4. And the point is that when the rook moves to b1, I can take the pawn on d4 with the knight, and after we trade knights here, for example, rook a4 is not good in view of f6, and just the white pieces are very uncoordinated, and actually just the opening of the position will favor me now. And yeah, I would have a huge advantage, but I completely missed this. And yeah, honestly, I didn't even put too much time in. Something that I have to work on is spending more times in these critical decisions in the middle game, because okay, I see that my opponent has a threat, but I don't even see if it is really something that I should be worried or that I should stop. But here, I decided, okay, I think I have to play d4 to stop this idea of d4. So if I play d4, he can no longer play d4. But here, of course, this move is not good compared to just bishop a6, because it allows white's knight to go to e4, and now just the knight has a very beautiful square on e4, can go to d6, can put pressure on f6, and yeah, my advantage is not as big as it was just 2 moves ago. But okay, it's still fine, and I still thought that this was a good position. Here I played bishop a6, putting pressure on d3 and asking my opponent, how are you gonna defend it? And here my opponent makes a huge mistake with knight h4, but we actually both miss the way to punish this. I'm pretty sure that he also didn't see it. Knight h4 makes a lot of sense, because you're protecting the pawn with the queen and the rook now, and of course I saw that, and I consider briefly taking on d3. Let's say, for example, knight takes d3, rook takes d3, bishop takes d3, and queen takes d3. And here I thought, okay, but like this is not good because I just traded two pieces for a rook and a pawn, and I don't think that is enough to claim advantage. And I think that even white is better because there's no open files for my extra rook. But here what we both missed in calculation is that the knight is hanging on h4, so I actually would just be up a piece here after queen takes h4, and I would be completely winning. You could just resign. But we both missed this, and yeah, like I just played bishop b7 because as I said, like we both just missed the hanging piece. But the computer says that is plus, there's -3, but I don't believe that is actually would be an easy win because let's say after knight takes on d3, I mean white is not forced to take back on d3. You can just play knight d6, and okay, I'm up a pawn, but what else? After bishop b7 here, I was feeling pretty nice, pretty comfortable. Although yeah, I mean retreating with the bishop is always like, okay, did I make a mistake? I'm retreating. And here I was expecting something like knight d6, and I would play bishop d5, putting pressure on the pawn on b3. And yeah, my idea was to eventually play queen e7 and actually even sacrifice, do an exchange sacrifice. I would sacrifice my rook for the knight and a pawn, and I thought that I would be having a lot of chances for dynamic play there and compensation. Because as I said, I think the rooks are not that great in this position, which is so closed. But my opponent completely surprised me with a very aggressive and ambitious move. Hey guys, Rick from the future here. I wanted to point out a variation that I also thought for a long while during the game. And the move that I played in the game was bishop b7, but I also thought about queen d5, which is actually a very interesting move that has the simple threat of taking on b3, but also has another threat of taking on d3, and after rook takes, to pick up the knight on e4. I spent a lot of time here trying to calculate if this worked or not, and I ended up miscalculating the variation. So here the first thing that I checked was if knight f6 was good or not for white. I ended up realizing that actually knight f6 is a big mistake, because after bishop takes on f6 and e takes on f6, my idea was to play queen d8, targeting this pawn on f6, and after like queen g5, protecting the pawn, I saw that I had knight d5, and there's no way for white to protect this pawn on f6. So I thought, okay, I'm winning a pawn there, and that's a nice trick. But of course, that's what the first variation that I saw. And one variation that I just couldn't figure out, and that made me not go for this, was just the simple rook a3, protecting the pawn on b3. I thought that this was good for white, and I thought that I had nothing better than to just go back to d8 with the queen, which is definitely not something that you want to do, to repeat the position like that. The problem here, and what I was trying to figure out, is that if I can play knight c2 without being punished, I'm definitely better. And this is queen d5 is an excellent move. But I thought that now that the knight is on c2, and even though I'm like tackling this rook, I thought that my opponent now had knight f6, and now here I thought that this actually worked. Why? Because after bishop takes, pawn takes, when I try to go get this pawn back with queen d8, now I thought that I'm like, my opponent can just protect the pawn with the queen, and yeah, I thought that after knight takes on a3, for example, I thought that I was just gonna get mated with something like queen h6 and queen g7, but of course here I'm not getting mated. If he goes queen h6, he loses the pawn on f6, and there's no real way for him to, do an intermediate move that wins something here, For example, f5 here, I can just actually play knight c2, because he's not actually threatening anything. Let's say pawn takes, I actually have just f takes on g6, and if he tries to sacrifice the knight here, I can actually take on f6, but I didn't see this, and I completely miscalculated. I didn't visualize correctly, and yeah, I just didn't want to allow a pawn on f6, but indeed this would be actually just completely winning for me, and yeah, I would be way better here, because yeah, just knight f6 just doesn't do anything for him. But yeah, it is what it is. Was f5, and yeah, f5 is actually a very good practical move. The engine doesn't like it because of course it's an engine, always sees the refutation immediately, but I didn't. I'm not an engine, and I definitely didn't see the refutation here. There's a lot of threats that white is making with this move, and of course it is a pawn sacrifice, and I took the pawn on f5, which is a big mistake here. I mean, what can I say? I was very shocked, and I was definitely nervous when I saw that he played this move. I was like, how can this work? But the answer is that it works because after e takes on f5, my opponent plays knight f5, sacrificing the knight, but I can't really take it, because if I take it, it's gonna be mate, unstoppable mate on g7. And after he played f5, I did realize that f5 was possible, and here I was just like clueless. What do I do? Because let's say I play, for example, knight c2, attacking the rook on a1. I thought that he didn't even need to move his rook. For example, he can play queen, bishop g5, attacking my queen, and once I move my queen, let's say to for example d5, here like my opponent has just knight f6 check, for example, and after bishop f6, just bishop f6, and now like I can't really remove this bishop. I'm just completely lost. Even though I can take a rook here, my opponent is just gonna move his knight or play queen g5 and mate me on g7. So I was very worried about allowing like stuff to land on g5 or f6. Also, I thought that after bishop takes d5, which is the best move, I thought that he could even do something like f6 and he would be completely fine, because I actually have the same problem. Like, this bishop is sort of hanging, this bishop is also hanging. I thought about bishop h8, but after d takes on e4, I don't really believe that I'm better, because yeah, the engine is saying that after just bishop e4 and f6, I can take the pawn on f6, and after e takes on f6, I just move the bishop back. But I just couldn't, like, no, this is, I just can't let my opponent just have a pawn on f6 like that when I don't have a dark square bishop, and I'm just like gonna get mated probably. And in the game you don't have all the time in the world to think, so you have to make a decision. And yeah, but once again, this is a very critical position. Just want to show that also knight d3 was working. I don't even know how. It's kind of crazy, because this just allows, in my opinion, like bishop g5, for example, and yeah, this just looks like horrible for black, but the engine seems to to get away with it by bishop e5. Now queen takes d3, f6, and I mean, what is going on actually? Bishop h6, e takes f5. I mean, nah, this is just too much engine lines, and yeah, I just couldn't figure this out, and I didn't really want to allow him to have the option of playing f6 or bishop g5 immediately. So, you know, I played e takes on f5, which is not a good move, because yeah, it allows just knight f5, and this knight here is very annoying on f5. You know, I saw that after knight takes on f5, I wasn't immediately getting mated, so I thought, okay, there's still gonna be some defense, most likely. And here I just decided to give up my bishop for the knight, which is definitely the correct decision. If I do a random move like a6, like this knight, if this knight lands on d6, for example, like knight d6, this is very unpleasant. These knights are just way too strong and way too menacing, and you know, like my pieces aren't doing much. So I did play bishop e4, which is the best move, and after e takes on d takes on e4, I actually had probably my biggest thing of the game. I still can't take the knight on f5 because bishop h6, and I really was worried about bishop g5 coming, and you know, just what would I do if bishop g5 came? You know, let's say a random move like rook c8. I was worried about bishop g5, and actually here it kind of works for me because I have f6, but after rook c8, which is just a random move, my opponent can actually play knight takes on g7 first, and I'm forced to take, and now bishop g5 is very strong because, I mean, he's just attacking my queen. I pretty much have to move the queen, but when I move the queen, he has just bishop f6, and I'm getting mated. Like, there's no way to stop this. Like, my dark squares are just way too weak. And I saw all of this also. Like, the problem is that f6 now just fails to e takes f6, and you know, like, I still have apparently king f7, but this is completely losing. Like, no way I would even have a chance here. So after seeing all these threats with knight takes on g7, bishop g5, I just decided to not let him play bishop g5, and I think that I found a pretty good practical move, which was f6. And after f6, my opponent took the bishop, which is correct, and after king takes on g7, apparently here the only move that you know, holds advantage for white is rook f1, which is kind of hard to see why this is the only move that holds the advantage. My opponent played what I thought was a pretty natural move, which was bishop f4, and yeah, this is kind of fun, pleasant for me. Let's say I just take on e5, which is playable. Bishop takes on e5, king g8, and once again, these dark squares are just so weak, and you know, my knight is misplaced, his rooks are coming to the f file, and yeah, this is just very, very unpleasant. But after bishop f4, I decided to bring my knight back in order to help with the defense. Knight c6, best move. My opponent took on f6, and I took back with the queen, and here my opponent played bishop g5, which I thought it was a slight mistake here because it just allows me to offer a queen trade. And of course, if my opponent takes the queens, I'm very happy with this. My pawn structure is better. There's no more attack. I'm not getting mated. I think my rooks are well placed, and yeah, I can make an argument that in this position my knight will be better than his bishop. But yeah, you can argue about that. But my opponent here actually he played queen h4. He thought for a little while, for the time that he had, but you know, I saw that he had queen g4, which would actually be very annoying because he's actually threatening to give a check on d7, which is wins my knight. Although, because I can't even play knight e7 because the bishop is protecting that square, and I can't do the natural rook d8 because the bishop is covering that square. And yeah, I didn't really end up finding a defense for queen g4 because my opponent had low time and he just played queen h4. But queen h4 is also a dangerous move. He comes with threats of bishop h6 winning the exchange. And I just realized that the rooks are coming to the f file, and this is like very dangerous. Here, actually, I was starting to to panic and hallucinate a little bit because I thought that even h5 wouldn't work. I thought that after h5 he still had bishop h6 winning my my rook, but of course that doesn't work because the pawn on h5 blocks the connection between the queen and the bishop. But it's kind of funny that I still I was so nervous and focused, and I didn't even realize that this no longer works. And actually I think that h5 is the best move. But okay, I played what I saw was a good move. I played king g8, getting out of the dark squares, avoiding checks. And here my opponent played rook f1. And here, I took a long think. I decided to play rook a8, which fortunately is the best move. And the idea is that after bishop h6, which my opponent played, I can actually just trade a pair of rooks. And here, after rook f1, my opponent, just has a lot of pressure and definitely an attack. And yeah, I decided to just bring the knight closer to my king with knight d8, which is a very nice move, just threatening to go knight f7, pressure this bishop, and kind of trying to consolidate my position. Here my opponent played the best move, queen f2, and of course he's actually threatening a nasty mating sequence with queen f8 check, just sacrificing the queen because after I'm just gonna do the random move to show you guys what the threat here was. So let's say h5, my opponent has queen f8 check, I'm forced to take, and after rook takes, this is checkmate. So yeah, kind of crazy. But I saw this and I played queen e7, the move to defend everything. And here my opponent, in his last seconds played e5, which is actually a big mistake because it just runs into knight f7. And knight f7, like now, my opponent isn't threatening to take the knight, so he has to move the bishop. And I saw that the bishop had pretty much two squares that he can try, which were f4 and d2. After bishop d2, I was trying to calculate if I could actually take the pawn here, which I actually can. After knight takes on e5, if my opponent plays rook e1, I can actually just sidestep with queen d7, for example. My opponent actually ended up playing bishop f4, which looks like it defends the pawn, looks like a poison pawn, but I calculated that actually I can take with the knight because rook e1 actually doesn't work because of a very beautiful tactic, knight f3 check, and I just took the pawn, and my opponent immediately captured on e5, and also saw that this wasn't anything dangerous for me because after queen takes on e5, queen f7 check, I have king h8, and my dark squares are pretty much protected. But here I thought, okay, but my opponent can take back the pawn on e7. But the thing is that this is just way too dangerous because after queen e3 check, my opponent pretty much has to move his king. If he tries rook f2, just rook f8 and GG's. So yeah, he would have to play king h1, and now I even have the nasty queen f2, and it's just over because there's nothing for white. Of course he can't take the queen, and his queen can't really come back, and let's say he tries to hold on with rook g1, just rook e1, and even if my opponent tries checking, his checks will just run out. I can just hide on h6, and yeah, this would actually be a pretty cool moment to finish the game, but my opponent didn't fall for that. He played h3, which is definitely a good move, not allowing those tactics. And here I just offered a queen trade. Just wanted to also gain some time on the clock, offer a queen trade, try to play it as safe as I could, because I knew that if someone is better, it's definitely me. Just I'm up a pawn, better pawn structure. And here my opponent, of course, declined with queen c4. I also was starting to get low on the clock here. I would say I was starting to get like 6 minutes, which is still a lot compared to like the 30 seconds of my opponent. But after queen c4, I gave a check. On e3, my opponent goes king h2. I go queen e6. Now offer a queen trade. But my opponent actually didn't take the queen, and he played rook f8. And after I didn't see rook f8. It's also not like a big deal because I just have king g7. But I swear to God, when he played rook f8, my heart just completely got shattered. I just gulped. I was like so like scared, because of course if I take the rook on f8, I lose instantly because he takes my queen. But thankfully, after like just 5 seconds of looking at the position, I realized, okay, there's nothing here. I just play king g7 and he has to trade something. So he just took the rook on e8, and I swear to God, like I didn't immediately take the rook on e8. I was really just going crazy. I was hallucinating because I thought that, okay, maybe I give a check first on e5. And what am I saying? Like, if I give a check, I just lose. So I took the rook, and yeah, this was a very tense moment. My opponent goes queen d5, I go queen e7, and my opponent goes b4, trying to create some counterplay on the queen side. And you know, here I was like, okay, if I trade queens, I'm winning, so let's try to force the queen trade. And I played king f6, threatening to go queen e5 check. My opponent goes queen f3 check, I go king e6, queen e4 check, king d6, takes on c5, takes back on c5, and my opponent goes queen a8. And I was like, dude, I was so like, how is this guy holding on and finding all these like tricks and just moves to keep the game going? Like, Jesus, like I have to give props to my opponent. He's just very resourceful, as you will see, because this game is far from over, honestly, even though the engine says -9. Here, after thinking for a while, I took some like minutes, 1 minute or 2 minutes. Like I took like quite a long time for the time that I had, because you know, here, what do I actually do? I just don't want to keep giving checks for no reason. I was wondering, should I play d3? Should I play c4? And I ended up playing d3, which is the best move for sure, just threatening to queen as fast as I could. My opponent goes back to f3, and I give a check on e5. And after king h1, my idea was to give another check and gain a tempo and play d2. And here I thought, okay, low time on the clock. Here my opponent gave a check on f6, king d5, queen f3 check, and I decided, okay, let's block with the queen. Try to make it as complicated as I could. Also, you know, try to force him to do a mistake. He was playing on increment for the last like 15 moves. He was just playing on 30 seconds. And, you know, going very low on the clock. Here my opponent played queen b3 check, and I realized that I could play c4. Didn't play queen b5 check. He played queen d1 check, and like, not queen d1 check, queen d1. And, you know, I was like, oh my God, bro, like this guy is holding on with everything. Like, oh my God, like how do I break through? This shouldn't be this difficult. Here I played queen d4, queen e5 check. And of course, the threat is that if he moves to the first rank, I give a check and I win. So he's forced to play g3. And now the calm move, queen e3, just, you know, just keeping the tension and just threatening to stopping any checks on f3 and threatening to just bring the king. And finally trade queens and win the game. Here my opponent played h4. I thought for a while, and I just decided to play h5. I knew that probably h5 wouldn't be the best move, but it was just a natural move, and I was just gonna gain 30 seconds. Like, it couldn't be that bad, h5. Like, this position, you know, there's just so many ways to win, so I just needed to stay calm and not blunder any perpetual or anything like that. Here my opponent went king h3. I just brought my king d4, and after queen c2, here I played queen d3, trying to threaten a queen trade, but the whole point of this, which ends up working for me, and finally I put the nail in the coffin, is that after he declines the queen trade with queen d1, I have queen f5 check, forcing the king to move, and after king g2, queen e4 check, and after king f2, I took the final minute to think through and to just finally put the nail in the coffin. I really didn't want to blunder, and I played queen e3 check, and after king g2, just finally queen e1, and I'm able to trade the queens. And it was in this position that my opponent resigned. And what a game, dude, what a game. This was totally different from the first encounter that we had. This game was way more exciting and dynamic, and you know, I was definitely very, very impressed that my opponent really played an amazing attacking game. Unfortunately, or fortunately for me in this case, I managed to hold his attack and to convert the win. And yeah, I mean, this I was actually very impressed with the game, and it was very tough. And you know, who knows, maybe this is the beginning of a rivalry, and maybe we will play many times more in the future. I would actually enjoy that. So yeah, GG's to my opponent. For now is 1-1, and let's see. So very nice start of the tournament, 2-2, and yeah, so next week more videos will come out of games. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye bye.